Shalom Mishpah. All right, we'll be in the Nevi'im teaching today. Will be in Ezekiel chapter 8. We'll start off by saying I had an interesting experience this week. I've been learning some things about the Hebrew language that I didn't understand before. And been learning about some conjugation, been learning about some different letter rules and Nikud rules that I hadn't understood before. And I found this really interesting app on a messianic discussion board where basically it's a different social media app, but it works through texting, but it's like a group text for, there's like hundreds of people on there all learning Hebrew, everybody learning at their own level and their own pace. And I made a comment that I have a lot of trouble with the Nikud, the vowel pointing. And the lady who runs the whole thing responded back to me and she said, "Why are you trying to learn the Nikud?" And I said, "Well, because my primary purpose of learning Hebrew, becoming better at it, isn't so I can have a conversation or read street signs or order food in a restaurant or anything like that. My primary reason for studying Hebrew at this time is to be able to read the Torah, okay, and to be able to read the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim." And so she says, "Oh," and she says, "Well, the Nikud aren't really necessary." And I've heard people say that before. We actually, Leah and I were just talking about this. We're working on our Bat Mitzvah project. The Nikud aren't really necessary if you know what the word is. You can tell from the context of the sentence, and that's why most people don't use it past basic, like what we call elementary school here. It's elementary school students and Bible scholars, basically. And she said, "You're already reading Hebrew on a much higher level than what most people here ever will." She said, "You're reading Shakespeare and then trying to relate that to conversational English." And she said, "You're going to confuse yourself doing that." She said, "Besides, that if you're trying to read Shakespeare and convert that to conversational English, you can't trust it to be correct." And I said, "Are you telling me that my Torah is not correct?" And she says, "Not for modern Hebrew." And I said, "Then I have no use for modern Hebrew." And that was the end of that conversation. I think too often people fall into the trap of thinking that just because something is current, it's correct. Okay, just because it's contemporary, it's right, and that's not true. It's not true at all. That would be like saying every rule that the Pharisees made was more important than the Torah. Well, the trap that they fell into was believing that. Okay, and that does not mean that I'm not going to continue using this app and learn everything that I can about the Hebrew language. What it means is that I'm going to have to bear in mind the slant that these people are coming from. They just want to learn how to speak when they're on vacation, or how to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, can you tell me where the deli is?" Things like that. They don't want to understand Moshe and the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. All right. So, little forewarning there. There's some great resources out there, but make sure you understand the direction that the teacher is coming from and how they're presenting the information. Okay, if all you want is conversational Hebrew, you don't need to study with me. And if all you want is to understand the Torah, a lot of those apps out there aren't going to help you. Okay, so chapter 8. In the 6th year, on the 5th day of the 6th month, stop right there. Let's stop right there and let's look at the context here. The 6th year of what? The 6th year of the captivity, the 6th year of Think about that. When we're reading a prophet, when we're reading anything in Scripture, we need to look at it in the context, first, the context of that writing, okay, that composition. In this case, we're looking at the prophetic book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel began by telling us the vision that he had in the plain, by the river, by the canal, and he proceeded through to where the very word of Elohim came to him and told him what he needed to do to demonstrate, to act out the siege that was about to happen to the land and to the city of Jerusalem. And then he begins, and we have to remember the chapter breaks, the verse breaks are put in later. They have nothing to do with the way that Ezekiel was recording this. And so we have to take this, I believe, to mean the 6th year of his prophetic ministry. Okay? In the 6th year of his prophetic ministry, on the 5th day of the 6th month, the 6th month of a prophetic ministry would have been counted from Aviv. So we're counting from 14 days before Pesach. We're not counting from Yom Kippur. All right? Or, as some people call it, Rosh Hashanah. Okay, that would be a secular counting. Since we're talking about a ministry, we would be counting from the beginning of the sacred year. He's on the 5th day of that month, so we're coming close to Yom Kippur. We're about 23 days short of it. I was sitting at home, and the elders of Yehudah were sitting before me. Sounds to me like he got their attention. You remember last time, 2 weeks ago, we were in chapter 7, nobody would listen to him. And Elohim told him, if they won't listen to you, cry out to the hills and the valleys and the streams and the mountains. Cry out to the trees, cry out to the stones, and tell them to bring glory to my name, because the people won't. Now, here we are a few years later, and we see that all the elders of the tribe of Yehudah are seated before him at his home, listening to him teach. And there the hand of Yehovah Elohim fell upon me. As I looked, there was a figure that had the appearance of fire. From what appeared as his loins down, he was fire, and from his loins up, his appearance was resplendent and had the color of amber. Now, we've seen this before in an earlier chapter, and it's interesting how a lot of English translations like to play this down, and they like to omit the description. And they say things like, I was reading last night in one version, it said, and there was appearance like what I saw in the vision on the plain. Well, that's true. This is the vision he saw on the plain. However, if you don't know what that vision is, and if you read this like most quote-unquote Christians do, if you read it like most mainline preachers preach it, you start here, you don't know what the vision on the plain looked like. You don't know that the flame of the very presence of Elohim ignited. And we don't know that the spark within the man of amber is the Ruach HaKodesh inside Mashiach. You have to read the context to understand that. It says, he stretched out the form of a hand and took me by the hair of my head. A spirit lifted me up between heaven and earth and brought me in visions of Elohim to Jerusalem. That same translation I read just said that he lifted me up. Doesn't say by the head. Doesn't say between heaven and earth. It says I saw visions. You see what we lose when we don't read a solid translation, or when we don't go back to the original, the oldest text, and look at what they say. to the entrance of the Penamith gate that faces north. Now, there's a footnote in the JPS that says we don't know exactly what Penamith means in the ancient Hebrew. Okay? But it was on the north side, which my understanding means that it was closest to the Holy of Holies. Okay? Which tells me that this was probably has something to do with entering into that area of the temple. That was the site of the infuriating image that provokes fury, and the presence of Elohim, the Elohim of Yisrael, appeared there like the vision that I had seen in the valley. Okay? So, now, the vision of the presence of the Elohim of Yisrael. We're talking about the Mashiach. We're talking about the Amber Man. And he appears at the north gate close to the Holy of Holies. That's some pretty important stuff. That's the kind of thing that we need to understand. He wasn't just standing at the temple. He wasn't just in Jerusalem. He was at a very specific place. The north side, is my understanding, the north side of the temple where it stood is the same place where other prophets like Jeremiah were shown in a vision that Messiah must enter if he is going to do the work of both king and priest. It is my understanding that this is the place where there was a porch built called Solomon's Porch, on which Messiah walked and preached about being the light of the world. And he did this during the Feast of the Dedication, during Hanukkah. We lose that understanding if we don't read the entire text. Mashiach, in a precarnate form, everything below his waist fire, everything above his waist glowing amber with a spark of the Ruach in him, standing on the north side of the temple, where later there would be Solomon's porch, where he in the flesh would walk on it and teach about being the light of the world. And we lose it if we don't read with that understanding. That is where Ezekiel was taken. And he said to me, O mortal, turn your eyes northward. I turned my eyes northward, and there, north of the gate of the altar, was that infuriating image on the approach. Infuriating images that were brought before the temple. Baal, Molech, Jupiter, Zeus. Throughout the ages, false images were brought before the temple because the people began to believe that it was okay to worship other Elohim instead of the true Elohim. And he said to me, mortal, do you see what they are doing, the terrible abominations that Beit Yisrael is practicing here to drive me far from my sanctuary? You shall yet see even greater abominations. So in the context, we see this is what was going on in Ezekiel's time. This was what it was infuriating Jehovah at that time. And he says, you shall see greater abominations. And what we're about to see is a playing out of how those abominations would occur, because he was being allowed to see all of history instead of his moment in time. Then he brought me to the entrance of the court, and I looked, and there was a hole in the wall. He said to me, mortal, break through the wall. So I broke through the wall and found an entrance. And he said to me, enter and set the vile abominations see the vile abominations that they are practicing here. I entered and looked, and there all detestable forms of creeping things and beasts and all the fetishes of Beit Yisrael were depicted over the entire wall. You know, most translations just say they were depicted on the wall. And it sounds like, oh, somebody had etched a little picture, or like maybe a kid today would take a magic marker and draw a little picture. No, it says they were depicted all over the wall. They had completely covered the wall of his sanctuary with images of unholy things, unclean things that from which we are commanded to be set apart. And you know, that could be anything. I remember when there was a church being built and the congregation was split. Before I tell you this, I'll tell you I'm proud to have never been a part of that denomination. But the congregation was split as to which direction the basketball courts and the gymnasium should run. Churches have split over whether or not to have a certain color of carpet in the sanctuary. It doesn't have to be creeping, crawling things on the walls. It can be put anything that is not holy that we put before Him. My question was, why are you building a gym in your church? And who cares what color the carpet is? Or if there's carpet. I don't know about everybody else, but this is what I told him. I said, I worship the God who is perfectly content to dwell in tents. Before them stood 70 men, elders of Beit Yisrael, with Yazaniah, son of Shaphan, standing in their midst. Everyone had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense smoke ascended. You hear that? Every one of them had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of smoke ascended. They're doing exactly what they were supposed to do with regard to Yehovah, but they're doing it with regard to unholy things. So you see, we can do all the right things with the wrong heart, and it means nothing. Just like doing all the wrong things with the right heart. I want to worship Him, so I'm going to have my kids look for eggs laid by imaginary bunny. Or I'm going to put up a tree in my house every December and call it in honor of Him. There are people who do that believing it's right, but when they learn that it's wrong, that's the test. That's the litmus test. Supposed to judge what the fruit is. When we know that something is wrong, do we continue doing it? If so, then our heart isn't right. But these were elders of Beit Yisrael. So they knew. They knew in their heart of hearts that it wasn't enough to go through the motions and put all these unholy things before Him. But they were doing it. Again he spoke to me, O mortal, have you seen what the elders of Beit Yisrael are doing in the darkness, everyone in his image-covered chamber? You see what they do when they're at home? Do you see what they do when the doors are closed? When no mortal eye can see them? For they say, Yehovah does not see us. Yehovah has abandoned the country. Now, I remember one time I was on search and rescue after a tornado. And I had this woman come to me crying because everything she had ever accumulated in her life was gone. And she says, I think God was trying to tell me something. No kidding. She proceeded to tell me, it'd been 10 years, I think it was, she said. It's been a bunch of years. And she said it was 10 years since she'd been in church, since she'd opened her Bible. She's like, I used to be so faithful, and then I let myself get distracted by all this stuff. You know what all that stuff was? The beautiful house and the fancy car and all the things that she had chased. That was her creeping and crawling things etched on her walls. And so the Elohim of Abraham came along and knocked down her wall. So many people say, when there's a natural disaster, a great earthquake or a hurricane or a wildfire, and they say, why has he turned his back on our country? He hasn't. Our country has turned its back on him. We can't expect blessings if we're disobeying. He gives us 613 ways in Scripture that we can connect with him, and most people never try any of them. And he said to me, you shall see even more terrible abominations which they practice. Next he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of Beit Yehovah. I have a footnote here from the JPS, says they don't know exactly what Beit Yehovah means, but they guess that it may mean the gate of the inner court. I think he brought him right up to the entrance of the Holy of Holies. Not just the inner court, but to the actual Holy of Holies, where Moshe had communed and Joshua had communed with Elohim. That's just my take on it. And there sat the women bewailing Tammuz. Footnote, Babylonian god. I'll tell you a little bit more about Tammuz. That he was a Babylonian god. He was a Babylonian god, half god, born to Baal, whose name means Lord, conveniently how they cover up Yehovah with Lord, or Yeshua with Lord, in most English translations. And he had a wife whose name was Astaroth. In another language, her name is Easter. And they had a son together named Tammuz, who happened to be born on December 25th. Now, Tammuz was a great hunter, and according to Babylonian myth, he was gored while hunting by a wild boar, and as he was dying, he decided to use a little bit of his half-god power. He saw this bird. He didn't much like birds, but he loved rabbits. So he decided he would turn that bird into a rabbit. But being only half-god, the bird continued, once it became a rabbit, the bird continued to lay eggs. This was the beginning of the Babylonian worship tradition, where the Babylonian priests would rape young women on their altar in the spring, and the babies produced by those unions would be born in December, around the 25th. And when they were about 3 months old, 4 months old, they would be slaughtered, and into their blood would be dumped eggs. And that's why the majority of Easter eggs today are red. If anybody didn't know that, that's what he is seeing. That's what these women are bewailing Tammuz, because he's been gored by this wild boar. And so Ashtaroth, Easter, declared that in her new religion, everyone would worship Tammuz. And on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox, or first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox, which just happens to be the date of Easter that the Catholics have set for all of them and all of Protestantism. Everyone would kill a boar and eat it and dip these eggs in its blood to dye them. It's Easter ham and Easter eggs. And you know what? The day, I told you there's a chronology here. Each abomination that he shows is worse and worse and worse in an order as they progressed. It became worse throughout the history that he was seeing. Guess what? That's the day. That's exactly what people are doing today and calling it in honor of him. And you know what that is? That's more unclean critters that they've painted on their walls. He said to me, "Have you seen, O mortal? You shall see even more terrible abominations than these." Then he brought me into the inner court of Beit Yahovah, and there, at the entrance to the temple of Yahovah, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men, their backs to the temple of Yahovah, and their faces to the east. They were bowing low to the sun in the east. And something about modern churches. Almost every church, every Catholic church I've ever seen, almost every Protestant church I've ever seen, sits east to west. Not all of them. Almost all of them. If you go into a Catholic church and you draw a line from east to west, it will line up directly on the altar. Why? So that when the sun rises in the morning, it sets in the evening. The first or last rays, sometimes both, of light shine down on that altar. Why? Because it's all sun worship. Because the 25 men have their backs to the temple and are worshiping the sun in the east. And he said to me, "Do you see, O mortal? Is it not enough for Beit Yahudah to practice the abominations that they have committed here, that they must fill the country with lawlessness and provoke me still further and thrust the branch of their nostrils?" The JPS translators say that this is the literal translation, thrust the branch to their nostrils. They believe that in that time period it probably meant goad me to fury. Okay, they think it was an idiom of that time period that meant to goad someone until they were angry. I, in turn, will act with fury. I will show no pity or compassion. Though they cry aloud to me, I will not listen to them. Good work, Ezekiel. You no longer have to cry out to the rivers and the mountains and the valleys and the trees and the stones and the streams. Finally, the elders of Beit Yahudah show up at your house and hear my word and learn my will. But guess what? They're still not doing it. And showing up and hearing it is not doing it. What are they doing at home? What are they doing in business? What are they doing when you're not watching them? I'll tell you what they're doing. The same thing their ancestors did when Moshe went up on the mountain. They built a golden calf. Their golden calves were unclean things carved on their walls. For the lady after the tornado, it was her house and her car. As believers here today, we need to be asking ourselves, What are our idols? What are our golden calves? What is distracting us so that we come here and we hear the word and we hear great teachings, like what Mela gave us this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, earlier this afternoon. And we hear those things, but do we apply them? Do we have a midrash on this teaching? You had something to say, but I was on a roll. I didn't want to lose where I was. So.
No, I wanted to repeat that entire thing you said because it's very significant.
Okay.
And I can't remember what it was. Don't worry about that.
I think it was the beginning.
It was the part of where the Messiah was literally the doorway. There was something.
Oh, in some of the prophets, I believe it's most presently presented in Jeremiah. I'd have to look it up, but there is a door, there is a specific gate the Messiah will have to enter if he's going to serve both as king and priest. My understanding is that it is on the north, or was on the north side of the temple, and that was also where Solomon's porch was. Okay, which tells me that he would have been walking in and out of it. To get onto Solomon's porch, he probably would have had to go through that gate. To come back into the temple from Solomon's porch, he would have had to go through that gate. Is my understanding. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm just thinking more and more churches that bring in how they line up.
Yeah, when I first learned that, Richard Reeves taught that one time, and I heard I can't remember if I heard it or read it in one of his books or something, and I was like, no way. And I went and I started looking, and I was like, oh wow, it's true.
A lot of Protestant churches that
One after another.
I was thinking of church regular and the way everything is facing west, but they have glass doors and east. So in the morning, the sun will come through. And there's incense above the altar and all this.
House of Prayer, where I used to minister. It's east to west.
Yeah, even though the road was this way.
It's like the building. The building doesn't sit square on the property. It sits square to the.
They might have done that before that. This grandfather had.
Oh, that I don't know.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know. But if he built it not knowing, he just built it by tradition. He didn't know that.
Right.
He didn't make
if I ever built a church or whatever, I'll build it north south. Just to bother you, but we know. That opens a lot more churches. I think So is that the thing where you went in the wall and everything? That was actually what happened. That wasn't like everything. It wasn't just a metaphorical thing. It was actually all happening. Like so.
Oh, it was all in his vision.
Right, but I mean, it wasn't like a spiritual thing. It was all actually physically happening.
The elders who were in his home was a physical thing. It says that he was taken in a vision.
Right, but I'm saying it wasn't like a symbology for what they were doing. Parts, it was actually what they were doing, even though he wasn't there at that time.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I think what he's trying to ask is those things that you see in his vision or actual worship practice. Actual physical worship practice.
Oh, yes, I believe so.
And not just where the heart's
I personally believe that, because I mean it doesn't say in his heart, in their hearts. It says in their their hidden rooms, and maybe that means the inner hidden parts of their hearts or their minds. But it says in their hidden dark rooms. So I'm thinking And then when they were at home, when they were where they thought nobody could see.
I was also going to say it wasn't. So does that mean that to Les's kind of wrong stuff? Does that mean that his father was Nimrod? His father was
Nimrod, in the Babylonian mythology, in one version of it anyway, Nimrod married Ashtaroth and became Baal, quote unquote, when he ascended. But then there was a whole. It's
yeah, no,
it's
sorry,
confusing.
I didn't say that because I know he was times.
I've seen enough of it. I've read enough about it to know it's pretty well out there. But that's one of those things, know thy enemy, but don't get too close to him. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Right.
Or even like Eastern religion, they work like they basically was the sun a lot. Everyone's called the sun.
Well, sun worship is the number one. Actually, I'm trying to think of the right word for that. Throughout history, it has been Satan's preferred mode of being worshipped is through the sun and through astrology. Followed closely by the worship of snakes and cats and birds of prey. Yes.
And you talked about the images on the wall, But I think immediately was astrological symbols and everything across the wall, because that is so ancient, and everyone just seems to somehow be involved with that in some way or other. It's actually so satanic.
Some people look at the whole zodiac thing and they think they just go by that. There was something I think it was Wesley posted. It said it had all of the zodiac symbols, and it's fine. It said the stars and planets will not affect your life in any way. They were real. I was like, good for you, Wesley.
This is the thing. If I had a new home deal, I would want the sun, so the windows to the east, facing the rising of the sun. Windows in the west, facing the sun setting. So then I see the moon rise, the moon setting. Because for some reason that's so much a part of it. It always has been. So is that evil?
Appreciating his creation is not evil. But if you look at Romans, it doesn't say the sin is to admire his creation. The sin is worshiping the creation rather than the creator. So.
You gotta be careful. I mean, I know this person. You gotta be careful, or you get off that, falling off that,
Mm-hmm.
and spirits can take over, and you get astray if you're not careful. I know that. I'm aware of that. So, but you gotta be mindful of all of it, which is He, God, brings higher. All these different. I don't care where you go, what you do, where, how far you go, God is treating everything. How far that is, how we pray, whatever. He's the first cause, He is the cause. There's nothing else. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking so very well.
Leah, did you have a question? You had your hand up. If you think of it, you can tell me after Oneg, okay? All right. Wally, would you give us a closing prayer for this session?